the prerequisites for prioritization. And basically, we are going to talk about three things. We will look at the market evidence, the impact, and multipliers. These are concepts, sometimes maybe new concepts that you are looking at, uh, or these might be some things that you already use in your day-to-day job today. So it will be kind of a refresher for you. But at the end of this webinar, what I would expect you to do is go back to your companies, go back to your work, and then just kind of think what are the different ways in which you are using these prerequisites, evidence, impact, and multipliers, and then try to connect all those dots together, build a prioritization framework yourself, and then try to use it in your backlogs and see how it is going on for you. And definitely talk to your stakeholders, talk to a couple of people in your team in different functions, and see how aligned they are with your approach, or if it needs some tweaking. So there might be some new terms that you hear. I'll try to explain them as much as possible during the course of this webinar. If not, feel free to ping back, drop a note, drop a message. I'll be happy to kind of get deeper into any of those terms. So the first one is market evidence. Now, what is market evidence? The term itself should be very self-explanatory. Any evidence that you get from the market that is sufficient for you to tell whether a feature is important or not. So objective and direct evidence that a feature delivers value to the market, right? So different examples could be if customers themselves have been talking about a feature that your product does not have. In customer advisory board meetings, customer interviews, surveys, market research, focus interviews. There could be multiple platforms in which customers come to you and they tell you what are the features that they need. That is one of the source. There might be experiments that you do. Every now and then product managers do some experiments. They try to see what are the different features that people want to use, what are the key metrics that people want to kind of focus on, and then that's how you come up with new ideas. So all of these market evidence kind of combine together, club together, and they try to back a feature, and that is what makes it more and more valuable. So if more people are asking about a feature, if there is evidence that market is looking for a feature, it definitely is a more valuable feature. It also reflects the volume of targeted customers who need the feature. So a feature which is needed by maybe, let's say, just a regional set of customers compared to another feature which is needed by globally by everyone. So it reflects the volume of the number of customers who are looking for that feature. And that is what also determines the value of the feature, whether it is just a small bunch of customers who are looking for it or much higher number of customers. Market evidence for this exercise that we are going to do for prioritization is represented on a scale of 0 to 10. 0 means nobody in your customer base is asking for the feature, is looking for the feature. And 10 means there is a high demand. Almost everybody in your customer segment is looking for that particular feature. And again, there are multiple ways, as I said. You can do customer interviews, experiments, competitive research. All these sources will give you indication about what your feature and where does it sit in that scale from 0 to 10, right? Now, what I'm assuming is even before you have a feature listed on the roadmap, you have done enough homework in collecting all the data. You have already talked to your customers. You have already gone through some of those surveys and experiments. And you already have that idea of where that feature should lie in this scale. So just take a note of the market evidence piece of it. We will see how it connects back. So looking at the roadmap that we have for the geriatric med application, I added a new column for evidence, labeled as E, and I try to kind of give the scale value to each one of the roadmap items. So scanner buy, for example. So it seems that when I asked some of my customers, when I did some customer interviews, focus interviews, and asked them whether scan and buy is something that would really help, this is the idea that kind of many people were associating with. They were really happy in kind of a feature where you just scan a prescription and then it kind of digitizes or everything that is printed, identify the medicine, the number of the quantity of the medicine that is needed, and then add to the cart, and you can just go ahead and buy it. So that is something that almost everybody in the customer base is looking for, and that is why it is given a number of 9. Compared to that, support for regional languages probably is something that people are not actually looking for. Not many people are kind of asking for support for regional languages. So that is why it is kind of scored a little low in this scale. And so on and so forth. You will see that there each and every feature in this backlog has been rated accordingly on the scale from 0 to 10, depending on, again, the volume of customers who are looking for this feature, the homework that you should have already done before adding the feature in the roadmap. You can also have items which have zero evidence. So in this case, for example, mandatory compliance regulatory updates, nobody's talking about that. So it has a evidence number of zero. Intelligent pharmacist, probably because not many people are aware of it. Not many people know the benefit that they will get out of it. So that does not have any evidence as well. So it is all right to have items that are with no evidence as well. Now, we move to pitfall number 3, which is misinterpreting employee opinion as market evidence. This is a very, very, very common pitfall that I'm sure most of you have seen in a workplace. There might be, somebody, a high executive, a leadership, a director, senior director, who might come back to you and say that I have a lot of experience in doing something, and I know by my experience that, this is what the market is looking for. That is an employee's opinion. That is somebody who is from a company looking at the market and trying to kind of justify some decisions, try to make their own opinion on why something is important or not. So never take that opinion as the market evidence. Do that hard work, do that homework of going out in the market, talking to your actual customers as much as possible. Do your research, primary, secondary, whatever possible, and try to gather as much information as possible on what actually your customers are speaking and talking about. Do not take that word of the employee as market evidence. So that is very common in the workplace. You will see that there are higher ups who have a lot of experience, who try to push their ideas, and they say that, you don't worry, I know that this is needed in the market. Just do not take their word. Do your homework. It might be okay to add it in the backlog, but still do that hard work and try to get that evidence as much as possible. Okay, moving on to the second prerequisite, which is the feature impact. Now, what is impact? So very simply stating, impact is the objective measure of the value that a feature delivers to the market. So how do you measure the value, right? It's not easy. It's kind of tricky because some features directly impact revenue. Some features do not directly impact revenue. They might impact the user experience. They might help you in retaining customers. Some other features might help you in making it more stable, making it more performant. So there is no one way in which you can really, really point a finger and say that this is the common scale in which you will figure out what the impact of a feature is. So how do you kind of tone down that confusion is by making sure that you identify those top business metrics on the basis of which you will measure the impact, right? So like this is an example that you have on the slide here. Acquisition, activation, engagement, retention, and revenue. You might be aware of these things. These are the top business metrics that somebody might be interested, a product manager might be interested at different points of product lifecycle. So depending on whether your product right now is in the stage of monetization, in that case, probably revenue and maybe retention is something that you are more interested about. There might be times when you are just launching an app, you are just looking at user acquisition. So acquisition and activation is what you are most interested in. So the key here is to identify those top business metrics and then measure the impact based on what feature impact has on that particular business metric. Never kind of focus on more than one business metrics, because the more metrics you put in this dynamic, you're diluting the impact more and more, and it gets more complicated. We'll see an example later on as well. So how you measure impact must align with the product strategy. So product strategy is what your focus on is, whether you're focusing on acquisition, activation, engagement. Go back to the product strategy that you had for this application. You want to maximize reach and you want to maximize engagement. So that is the product strategy that you have as a company, as a product. And based on that, you should pick, identify, and focus on the business metrics. So ideally focus on just one metric, not more than one. But if it is not possible, maybe you can go maximum to 2 metrics, but not beyond that. Impact is represented on the scale from 1 to 5, again, depending on how much value a particular feature is adding for that 1 or 2 business metrics that you have identified. So in this graph, for example, in this chart, you would see that feature 1 is something that is impacting engagement the most. Whereas if you look at the feature 2, it is more catering towards activation and not so much at everything else. Feature 4 is more focused on revenue. So when you have a product strategy, for example, if your product strategy is monetization, maximize revenue, you are going to pick up feature 4 definitely, but maybe not feature 2, because feature 2 does not contribute to revenue as much. So it gives you an indication, an idea of what kind of features will fall on top of your backlog and what features will kind of go to the bottom, depending on what is your focus. Now, let's say next quarter, if the focus of the company, the product strategy changes, and if now you are focusing on acquisition, then feature 3 becomes more priority. And feature 4, because it does not care about acquisition at all, it gets lower in the priority. So that's the idea. That's how you should kind of look at every item in a backlog and try to map it feature impact wise, mapping it with the business metrics that you are measuring. Again, going back to the example, so we have the list of the features. We said that we have the evidence numbers. Now, what I did was I added 2 more columns for revenue and engagement, because that is your product strategy. You wanted to see, how you can maximize revenue and how you can maximize engagement. Now, what you do is for each one of these feature items, you look how much impact it is going to make in revenue and engagement, right? So in a scale on a scale from 1 to 5, you try to figure that out. So for example, for scan and buy, it does improve engagement a lot. It makes sure that it's much easier for you to just kind of scan a prescription, eliminate any manual intervention, and then take you to the check-in page, the checkout page, and then you go ahead with the transaction. So it does impact engagement on a high scale, but probably revenue not so much, because the number of transactions are being the same. The number of people who are making transactions is the same. You have not acquired a lot of new users. So the user base is the same who are active users. There is no new feature for them to kind of get easy access to medicine. So maybe revenue would remain the same. If they did not scan, they would have just gone ahead and manually entered the set of medicines as well. So on the revenue scale, it might be a little bit lower. Support for regional languages probably. Engagement is really high because again, you are launching it for much more extent of customers, new segments. People who are not so familiar with English, they will have more engagement with your application. So out of the 6 million users who are, only maybe if 800,000 customers are actively engaging with your application, maybe you will improve that metric by introducing more regional languages. But revenue, again, maybe not so much. So for each one of these feature items, you just do this exercise and you figure out what is the impact that this feature will have on the revenue or the metric that you are measuring. And as I said, try to limit it to 1. You can go maximum to 2 metrics, because no product manager, no company should focus on more than 2 or 3 metrics at a time. It is very difficult to kind of win or succeed in multiple metrics in a given time frame for a particular planning cycle. So make sure that you are limiting that. So what I did was I just kind of found the average, calculate the average for the revenue and engagement metrics, and that is what gives you the impact numbers. So now you have the features, you have the evidence, and you have the impact, right? The next pitfall that we are looking at is missing alignment with the project strategy. Now, if you go back and look at this slide, we are talking about revenue and engagement, right? Because that is the product strategy. Now, what if revenue and engagement were not the metrics that I put on this particular, these 2 columns? What if there was some other metric that I was thinking about? Definitely it's going to fail, because I'm not then thinking about the product strategy. My product strategy is something else, and I'm looking prioritization from a very different lens. And that is what will kind of make this entire prioritization exercise a failure. And you're not going to prioritize the right items or for that particular time frame. So make sure that you have a very good understanding of the strategy. Talk to people who are involved in making these strategies, understand why the strategy is in place, and then get back to your own features, the product areas that you own, and see for those particular strategy, what are the metrics that you need to work on to support that strategy, right? So strategy could be focusing on revenue, getting new users, saving cost, more usability, user experience. There could be n number of strategy that your leadership might be putting at a place. You have to just make sure that you are pointing and focusing on the right metrics for your own products, aligning to that strategy.